Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I'd review this little video that I thought was very particularly interesting. And I don't really know when I'm gonna release this video because overall, I think that, I kind of already covered this topic a multitude of times, but this is gonna be a video by that Chronicles of Judah 144. I've already stated that I've watched this channel quite a few times in the past. He's definitely one of the channels that I would probably more recommend for people. Doesn't mean that I agree with everything that the man says, but I think that at least what I'll give the man credit for is that I find him to be a decent amount more logical and objective than some other people. Once again, does that mean that I agree with everything on the man? No, not necessarily. But I do give him a lot of credit. I think that all in all that he does a lot of research and that I think overall that he has a logic behind usually what he says. But in this video, Andre SOG Ward, who once again, in my view, is also an all-time great fighter. He's going to be talking about it, I believe, in this video. And Chronicles of Judah 144 is going to be giving his opinion about what Andre SOG Ward said about Canelo Alvarez's resume, especially during that time when he was fighting fighters like Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith and Caleb Plant and yada, 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 yada. And although I would say probably a good 85 to 90% of the time I would usually agree with that at Chronicles of Judah, I would say that there's some points in this video where I would tend to disagree with him a little bit more, just in my personal view, although I can kind of see where he's coming from. But anyways, let's see overall what they all have to say. Let's tune in. I thought that it was a very interesting watch. Let's get into it.
All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, every once in a while, if you happen to watch a sport long enough, you'll see an outstanding participant, a transcendent athlete who's able to dominate in the sport for a certain period of time. And then they'll be able to transition to another aspect of that sport and become as outstanding in that other capacity as they were as an actual participating athlete. We saw it in basketball with Charles Barkley, who's gone on to become such an outstanding figure in the media world that many people know him more for his exploits as a commentator on TNT than they did when he was an outstanding MVP level basketball player for the 76ers, Phoenix Suns, Houston Rockets. Well, Andre Ward is on his way to becoming the boxing version of Charles Barkley. I think that over the course...
I'm actually going to have to do a basketball video one of these days, and there was actually a video that I wanted to review one time by that of Mr. Chronicles of Judah 144 on his YouTube channel, because I believe that he talked about a conversation between that of Tim Duncan and Hakeem Olajuwon. And, oftentimes he, comes out with basketball lists. That's actually how I first discovered his channel, I believe, through that of basketball videos. I think that he knows a lot about basketball, and that appears to be the sport that debatably he's the most interested in. But I kind of wanted to talk about that one, actually, because that there was a Tim Duncan versus Hakeem Olajuwon debate. For those of you that have actually seen my basketball videos in the past, you'll know that Tim Duncan, in my view, that he's the most underrated top 10 player of all time. And in my view, when you talk about Tim Duncan, Tim Duncan, in my view, is probably right there with Larry Bird, LeBron James, Wilt Chamberlain, and maybe a couple of other guys, just in my personal view. But the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because he's going to bring up something about Canelo Alvarez, comparing him to another champion, especially in Salvador Sanchez. And the thing is about me is that even if I believe someone else is more skilled than a certain person, I can't put that person above that person that particular athlete if they're a decent amount more accomplished. And when we talk about, for example, the Tim Duncan versus Hakeem Olajuwon debate, like, for example, Chronicles of Judah 144, he believes that that's a very close debate or that they're in the same league. Just in my personal view, I don't think that those two are really in the same league at all. And that's not me stating that Hakeem Olajuwon was not extraordinarily skilled. You can even say that Hakeem Olajuwon was more skilled than Tim Duncan. I don't really have a huge problem with that. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about a player that has 3 more championship appearances, 3 more championships, like it isn't even like it's just 1 or 2, 3 more championships, and then on top of that, 1 more finals MVP, 1 more MVP. I mean, there's literally no argument. It just is what it is. And, I kind of have to have that similar approach with that of Canelo Alvarez and Salvador Sanchez. I've heard a lot of people state that they believe that Salvador Sanchez is the greatest Mexican fighter that they've ever seen, at least in terms of skill. And, that might very well be the case. But we don't really put anyone else on that pedestal, or overall on that level for being debatably the greatest fighter of all time for just being a one-weight division champion and only having a few title defenses. So I can't do that with Salvador Sanchez. It is what it is.
Course of his commentating and analysis career, he's going to become the point man, the go-to guy for what's going on in the sport of boxing, who's who, which fighters are actually credible as being the best in their weight class, and who has a resume that is worthy of note and tribute, as opposed to fighters who are overblown and overrated. And as we're going to see over the course of this segment, Mr. Andre Ward is going to call out Canelo Alvarez to a degree. He's going to give him a sizable level of respect, as he should, in accordance to many of Canelo's,
Well, Andre Ward has been on Canelo's ass like a rash overall for a very long time for whatever reason. And this is just in my personal view, but I think it's because that Andre Ward and Canelo Alvarez, that they are somewhat compared as contemporaries, because they both did at one time compete at the 168 and 175 pound weight classes. And they were both somewhat a part of the same generation. And I think that Andre Ward realizes that a lot of people are going to be comparing Canelo Alvarez to him as well and saying that Canelo was greater than him. And if you believe that Canelo was greater than Andre Ward, you definitely have an argument for that. Now, if you think that Andre Ward is greater than Canelo, that's also your business. You have a great argument for that. But Canelo, at the end of the day, he does have more champions on his resume, debatably more A-grade names on his resume when it comes down to it. They both were looked at as number one pound-for-pound fighters at a certain time, and they're both extremely skilled. And Canelo, of course, has also won in more weight classes and been unified in a weight division. Now, some of those things may not necessarily put him over Andre Ward, but in my view, they're pretty much along the same level, just in my personal view. And I'm not stating that everything that Andre Ward states about Canelo is necessarily false in my view, but there's clearly, in my view, a little bit extra something there, just in my personal view. Because Andre Ward, once again, he gets on Canelo's ass, in my view, a little bit too much.
Accolades and accomplishments. But he is going to bring to light certain things that I've said about Canelo's.
And some people overall might say, well, what do you mean? Canelo Alvarez is regarded in that great light, so why would it not be okay for Andre Ward to get on his ass? He's supposed to be held in high regard. If you're looked at overall, with that, then, heavy is that wears the crown. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, and all that's good. I understand that. But when Andre Ward claims certain things about, when we talk about Canelo Alvarez being ranked with all-time great Mexican fighters, and all of a sudden that's a different conversation, basically insinuating that Canelo Alvarez is not really in the same conversation with some of those guys, or maybe he was just stating overall that he's not the greatest Mexican fighter ever. Listen, this is just my personal view of it, and to be honest with you, I really don't even think it's quite debatable. Canelo Alvarez is right there with Chavez, in my view, or Salvador Sanchez, whoever you put up there. Canelo Alvarez is debatably the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Like I said, I can't have other fighters ahead of him, other than that of possibly Chavez. That's the only one. Like I said, some people might bring up Sanchez. I'm sorry, he just accomplished too little.
Canelo's resume, that being that there's a bit more fat on that steak than people give it credit for. Don't get it twisted. I think that Canelo has gone above and beyond in trying to fight outstanding fighters and champions. But there was a little stretch where it was very obvious that, his team decided that he was going to fight the same type of fighter, the straight up and down European who happened to have a belt, so that when they defeated him, they could claim that they won a fight against a quote unquote champion. Don't get it twisted. There were many fabulous and highly nuanced fighters.
I understand what you're saying, Mr. Judah, but this is also where I have to question a little bit of your current boxing knowledge. And I'm not stating that, Judah does not understand a lot about boxing. I think that he's a brilliant boxing commentator as well. But this is where I have to question if you know a whole lot about Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant. Now, if you want to say that a little bit about Callum Smith, that's a little bit understandable. I understand that. Now, if you want to talk about Rocky Fielding, that's understandable. I get that. Or Avni Yildirim, that's cool. I get that. But when you talk about Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders especially, I can't really criticize Canelo Alvarez overall for those moves. And I'm not sure if Judah knows, but Billy Joe Saunders at one point in time at the middleweight division, he was right up there as one of the biggest threats in the division, right there with Danny Jacobs and Gennady Triple G Golovkin. One of the biggest fights in boxing was going to be Gennady Golovkin versus Billy Joe Saunders at one point in time. And another one of the biggest fights in boxing was going to be Demetrius Bubble Andrade versus that of Billy Joe Saunders. All right? So once again, I can't really agree with Judah, at least if he's talking about Billy Joe Saunders and that of Caleb Plant. And Caleb Plant also at one point in time was looked at by some people as the best 168 pounder on the planet by some people. Now, in my view, he probably would have not been above David Benavidez, but some people overall would have ranked him as such. So if we're talking about Avni Yildirim, who of course was a Turkish fighter, if we're talking about Callum Smith, and those are, Callum Smith, even though I'd still rank him as A minus, and if we're talking about Rocky Fielding, I would totally agree with that. But if we're talking about Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, no, I can't agree with that. Because even Chronicles of Judah, I believe here, or Judah, I'll call him, he even stated later on that he believes that Caleb Plant is better than Jamal Charlo. And I completely agree. Both Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, in my view, they're both better than that of Jamal Charlo. I keep telling people this, that many people for the longest time, they kept calling, for Canelo to fight Jamal Charlo. And all that's very good. Jamal Charlo was an undefeated black American champion, but a lot of people really like to compare some of these black American champions overall to like a Floyd Mayweather or Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. And they said that, Charlo, he has that black American style that's going to give Canelo Alvarez problems. Jamal Charlo is not really a slick black American fighter. He has some slick elements to him, but he's not really a guy that that is super duper slick. He's not a Mayweather. He's not a Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. Nowhere near. Like I said, what Jamal Charlo is like a bigger version of Danny Garcia. That's what he is. He can be very straight. He does not move his head very well. He relies a little bit too much on his counterpunching ability. He has a little bit of clunky footwork at times. Trust me, if Canelo and Jamal Charlo would have happened, it would have been nowhere near as competitive as Billy Joe Saunders versus Canelo, even with the stoppage. Is what it is.
Over the course of, Canelo's reign of terror throughout boxing, many boxers who had outstanding characteristics and attributes and happened to be, nimble or highly coordinated on their feet, had great punching power, so on and so forth. I've always said that, in my view, Canelo Alvarez is definitely in the conversation as the second greatest Mexican fighter of all time.
He's not just in the conversation for the second greatest Mexican fighter of all time. He's in the conversation for the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. But I'm at least glad Judah stated that. Now, I understand his perspective because he put Salvador Sanchez above Canelo. Do I? No. Because once again, he just hasn't accomplished enough. But, I kind of understand Judah's saying because in an individual sport, maybe it can be a little bit more about individual things or individual skill sets. I kind of get that. But once again, we don't put other fighters up on that level, just for accomplishing certain things. Just by believing overall that they were the most skilled fighter of all time or all this other stuff. All that's very great, and I understand it. But at the end of the day, a fighter that was only in one weight class, because even Judah himself has stated in other boxing videos that I've watched of his, that overall, that in order to be proved as the number one pound-for-pound fighter, you have to fight within a multitude of weight classes, and I agree with that. I agree. He's also criticized, or at least overall stated something about Marvin Hagler, that when he was compared to Floyd, that, overall, that he never moved up a weight class. Salvador Sanchez also never moved up a weight class either. I believe that he stayed within one weight class. So as skilled as whatever you may believe that Salvador Sanchez was, or what advantages he had over Canelo, and I'm sure that he did have certain advantages over Canelo. In my view, he can never be greater than Canelo Alvarez. Never. Because I'm sorry, but you're only in one weight class, and on top of that, you only have a few, defends of your belt. I mean, I'm sorry, it just is what it is. I can't place a fighter like that above Canelo. It is what it is, or Chavez. And it's really even a discussion, at least in terms of accomplishments or greatness, is Salvador Sanchez really even above someone like a Juan Manuel Marquez? In terms of skill, I'd probably maybe debatably put Salvador Sanchez above him, but in terms of accomplishments, no, probably not.
For me, I don't see any fighter being able to transcend what I saw with Salvador Sanchez. Number two, I probably have Juan Manuel Marquez and maybe Canelo 2A, or maybe Canelo is 2 and Juan Manuel is.
And I also disagree with that. I understand Judah's point because Juan Manuel Marquez was a great fighter, but in terms of being greater than Canelo, no. In my view, Canelo was more skilled than Juan Manuel Marquez at his best. Juan Manuel Marquez, by the way, fabulous fighter, terrific fighter. Also another guy that hates Canelo Alvarez's guts, by the way. But when it comes down to a great fighter, no doubt about it. But in my view, for you to be above Canelo, you would have had to have won the majority of the big fights throughout your career. Juan Manuel Marquez only has one big win in his career in terms of defeating the debatable #1 pound-for-pound fighter of his generation in Manny Pacquiao. Now, some people, of course, might say, well, to be fair, Canelo Alvarez never really defeated the #1 pound-for-pound fighter of his era. He got completely dominated against Mayweather. And that's a very fair point if you really want to bring that up. But Juan Manuel Marquez, there's a reason why he lost a majority of those fights to Manny Pacquiao. It is what it is. And not even just Manny Pacquiao. He also got completely dominated against Floyd Mayweather Jr. when it came down to it. He also lost some other fights. He got completely outboxed by that of Timothy Bradley. And that was, he was 40 years old to be fair, but that was also coming off that of the Manny Pacquiao knockout win. So it is what it is. So I can't have Juan Manuel Marquez above Canelo. I'm sorry. I don't think that they're super far apart, but in terms of being over Canelo, nah, sorry. Because Canelo Alvarez was debatably the best fighter of his generation, at least post Floyd Mayweather Jr. era. Juan Manuel Marquez, you can never, ever, ever, ever debate that he was debatably the best of his era. Never.
2A. And then you also have Ricardo Lopez and, of course, the great Julio Cesar Chavez, so on and so forth. It depends on your preference. For me, Salvador Sanchez is #1. And Canelo's definitely in that top 3 to 5 range.
Thank you, sir, for at least stating that, because a lot of these other idiots, especially from the LDBC and new media, Canelo's not even within my top 5. Like, get the fuck out of here. Like, Canelo Alvarez, in my view, like I said, to me, he's either #1 or #2. If you wanted to maybe debate Salvador Sanchez or Juan Manuel Marquez, I would kind of get it. But to me, Salvador Sanchez, the title pool is just too small, or the sample size is just too small. Once again, I can't have a fighter over someone that's a 4-weight division champion, won belts from 154 all the way up to 175, and have him over him. I'm sorry, I just can't do that.
Of all-time great Mexican fighters, and one can argue that by the time his career is over, he'll be considered most likely a top 10 all-time greatest fighter based on the accomplishments.
Agreed, sir. Thank you for stating that. And I'm not quite sure if Canelo right now would be within my top 10 fighters of all time, but you could debate him within the top 20 fighters of all time, because if we're talking about Canelo Alvarez, what really separates him super duper much from that of a Julio Cesar Chavez or a Roberto Duran? Because if we're going to be real about Roberto Duran here for a second, although he was a terrific fighter, to be fair, he beat Sugar Ray Leonard. But what other truly A-grade fighters did he really beat? I mean, he couldn't even beat Wilfredo Benitez. He also lost, I believe, overall. I won't really count the Tommy Hearns loss, because Tommy Hearns overall was, overall damn 2 meters taller and lengthier than him. And it's like, come on, I really ain't going to count that one. But, he also lost to Marvin Hagler, even though that was a fight that could have went either way in the middle of that fight, and then I think he ended up losing it in the end. He beat some great fighters throughout his time, there's no doubt about it, but a lot of the times, especially when he moved up in weight against a true A-grade level fighters, he pretty much lost. So is there really that much of a difference between a Canelo or a Roberto Duran or a Chavez?
But Andre Ward is going to call certain things into question. Of course, they're going to talk.
And Canelo, to be fair, Canelo has won the majority of his big fights, whether they've been bigger than him or smaller than him, or his own same size. He was able to beat Gennady Golovkin in the rematch. He was able to beat Danny Jacobs. He was able to beat Miguel Cotto. See, the thing is about Canelo, in my view, is that he can beat, a multitude of styles within the ring. Juan Manuel Marquez, overall when it came down to Juan Manuel Marquez, I'm not stating that he couldn't beat a multitude of styles, but when he fought a truly #1 pound-for-pound potential candidate, he usually ended up losing. Now, to be fair, Canelo did lose to Bivol, but Bivol was a decent amount bigger than him, and he ended up losing to Floyd. But, Floyd, of course, is debatably the greatest fighter of all time. Marquez didn't just lose to Floyd. He also lost to Pacquiao a multitude of times, and he lost to some other fighters. So it is what it is.
Talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Okay, let's table that for a second, because I want to get on to Canelo. Canelo, on the other hand, starts at junior middle, wins titles junior middle, super middle, moves up to light heavy, knocks out Kovalev. Now, he wasn't the Kovalev that you fought. Still, he was winning fights.
Not only was Kovalev not the Kovalev that Andre Ward fought, Kovalev wasn't even the Kovalev who was supposed to fight Canelo, because it was very obvious to me that Kovalev was the recipient of something under the table that inspired him to do the stanky leg and just fall down. I mean, to me, he took a dive, allegedly. Just my view of it.
And he's not the only one that stated that. I would need to know 100% why he stated that. But once again, you never know. It's possible. But at the end of the day, if Sergey Kovalev took something under the table, then what that means is that he knew that his time was over. So it is what it is.
To Bivol at light heavyweight, which to me, if you keep moving up in weight and if you fight the hardest guy to fight at the higher weight class, eventually you're going to lose. I don't hold that against him.
Nor do I. I've said point blank, I don't think that Canelo's loss to Bivol should affect wherever he is in anyone's pound-for-pound rankings, because at the end of the day, to Max Kellerman's point, if you keep moving up in weight, especially when you're fighting a fighter who's so much naturally bigger than you, you are going to lose.
Thank you for stating that, sir. Finally, overall, someone has a little bit of logic on that situation. And don't get me wrong, just because you move up a weight class doesn't always mean that you're the smaller guy. Canelo is somewhat of a heavily built dude, but Dimitri Bivol is a natural light heavyweight. Canelo is pretty much a natural middleweight fighter. He's a dude that's 5'7" overall when it comes down to it, with a 71-inch arm reach. And then, you had these idiots like Dante's Boxing Nation and all these other guys, stating, oh, Canelo's not even on my top 10 pound-for-pound list anymore. Like, please.
But to me, Terrence Crawford is number one pound-for-pound just because of eye test and overall skill set. But Canelo, if we're going to talk about resume...
Well, if this was before the Errol Spence Jr. fight, I can't agree with you. If this was after the Errol Spence Jr. fight, then I would agree with you. Now, there's certain things that Terrence Bud Crawford, can do that Canelo can't do, but there's also certain things, in my view, that Canelo can do that Terrence can't do. And Judah has even acclaimed to this as well, at least before the Errol Spence Jr. fight. If you really take a look at Terrence Bud Crawford overall before that of the Errol Spence Jr. fight, once again, a lot of people take a look at certain fighters and they, put certain attributes to them just because of the past, because they kind of want to associate things. But that doesn't mean that those fighters have those attributes. For example, like I stated, a lot of people want to associate just because you see an elite black fighter that, oh, they're the next Mayweather or they're the next this, but they may be nothing near to what Floyd Mayweather Jr. was, or really even fight in a similar way. Like Jamal Charlo, just basically because he's a black American champion, a lot of the LDBC and new media tried to associate him with Floyd Mayweather Jr. He fights nothing like Floyd Mayweather Jr. And when you talk about overall, some of the other styles when it comes down to it, like Terrence Bud Crawford, he fights a lot more like Floyd Mayweather Jr., but he's also not a supremely elite defensive fighter, or at least he wasn't before the Errol Spence Jr. fight. Now, to give him credit, he showed great defensive ability in the Errol Spence Jr. fight. But in a lot of his other fights, like against Gamboa, or against Sean Porter, David Avanesian, some other fights, he did not have elite level defense. Take a look at the Sean Porter fight. Crawford got hit a decent amount in that fight. So Canelo, when you talk about both of those fighters at their best, Canelo is the greater defensive fighter. Now, the thing that Terrence would have the advantage in my view, would be that of the feet. And Judah has already stated that as well. And he's a much bigger, supporter of the feet overall than, some of the other attributes. And I get that, but Canelo and Crawford, when you talk about in terms of skills, they're right there in the same way. But in terms of resume, it's really not even close. But right now, I would also have Crawford as my number one pound-for-pound fighter just because of that win that he got over Errol Spence.
Resume, he's the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. It's either him or Tyson Fury.
Hey, listen to that, folks. Listen to that. What have I been saying about Tyson Fury? What have I been saying about Tyson Fury? I keep getting these people in my comment section that's saying you're wrong. Tyson Fury is trash. Tyson Fury is garbage. His resume is shit. What if I keep telling you guys about Tyson Fury? There's a reason why I have him within my top 5 pound-for-pound list. All right? My list is very consistent.
He still hasn't fought Benavidez, who I'd love to see that fight along with. Hasn't fought either Charlo brother, let alone the bigger one, right?
Well, he's not going to fight Jermell. Jermell fights at 154. It's Jermell who's supposed to be trying to call him out. The Benavidez fight, look, we've been talking about that fight for the last 3 years now. I'm talking about people who actually follow the sport. For those of us who understand what we're looking at, it's very clear who bowls the greatest challenge to champions while they're in the midst of their championship run. There's always a guy who people look at and say, okay, if he gets into the ring with this fighter, he's going to be in trouble. When Floyd Mayweather was champ at welterweight initially, people tried to build up Antonio Margarito. I never thought that Margarito was going to be a problem for Floyd because I saw Margarito fight Clottey on Showtime, and he was so slow.
Antonio Margarito was a very one-dimensional fighter. And once he got caught with those hand wraps, when it came down to it, his career was basically over. Because Antonio Margarito needed, Antonio Margarito actually had good power even without the hand wraps. Because I assume that he didn't have the hand wraps in the Manny Pacquiao fight. And Manny Pacquiao still said that his punches were some of the hardest that he ever took. So imagine overall the amount of power that he had with those tainted-ass hand wraps. It is what it is. Antonio Margarito was a very, 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 very one-dimensional fighter. He was the definition of a Mexican brawler. He had no other way of fighting than trying to plod you down and get you with uppercuts overall and just trying to wear you down over a fight. And it didn't matter how many hits that he could take. That's one thing I'll give Margarito. That's one actual natural talent that he had for boxing, is that he had a great chin. But do I believe that more than likely he was using tainted hand wraps for the majority of his career? Absolutely, no doubt about it. Do I believe that he used it in the Cotto fight, the Sergio Martinez fight, the Clottey fights, the Kermit Cintron fights? Absolutely.
I saw him fight Paul Williams, and he was so slow. This was during Floyd's little mini retirement in '08. When I saw him fight Paul Williams, and he was so damn slow. Like, he hit hard, and you could tell that if he got to you, he could hurt you. But he was so slow.
He was very slow. He definitely was slow, but that would have been interesting overall to see had Floyd maybe caught Antonio Margarito's hand wraps overall. If Antonio would have hit him overall with those tainted hand wraps, would have Floyd been fast enough? And of course, I'm not into seeing a fighter overall, cheat, and get in the ring against a fighter that's fighting fairly. I'm just stating overall, I wonder overall had Floyd's speed, actually been enough, even had Antonio Margarito been cheating, had it been enough overall for him to get past him. Because, Paul Williams, even though, I agree with a lot of judges' assessments that he's a weight class fighter, he was a guy that was a bit overrated in my view. But Paul Williams also was 6'2" and a guy that was decently lengthy. Floyd would have not had that leverage. Now, he was a guy that would have been quicker than Paul Williams, of course, and a lot smarter and better, but that would have been interesting.
So I never thought that he was ever going to give Floyd a problem. Who I did think he would give a problem to, though, was Miguel Cotto, because Miguel Cotto always got touched in his fights. And whenever he was in the ring against another fighter who had any level of competitive spirit, there was always a moment where Miguel got wobbled to a certain degree. So I knew that if he got into the ring with Margarito, there was going to be a major problem there. So when what happened came to fruition, it did not surprise me. Now, we came to find out that Margarito was cheating.
That definitely overall is somewhat true. Miguel Cotto did get wobbled a little bit in some of his fights against DeMarcus Chop Chop Corley, Zab Judah, Ricardo Torres. It did happen a few times, but Cotto was a great fighter.
But I think even without the pads, he would have given Miguel Cotto a hell of a time.
He would have given him a hell of a time, but in my view, he wouldn't have beat him. Antonio Margarito had great power, but with the tainted hand wraps, it was unbelievable power. But yeah, do I believe that Antonio Margarito was cheating in the Miguel Cotto fight? Absolutely.
Where is Canelo's legacy for you right now?
It's tricky. It's complicated. Because on the surface, he's fought everybody. He's done it.
Not really that tricky, Andre Ward. Canelo Alvarez is an all-time great fighter. He's a great fighter. Now, depending on where you rank him overall, that's your business. But he's an all-time great fighter and a great fighter. It's really not that tricky.
Everything, he's taking all the risks. If you know what you're looking for, when you look at some of those names he fought, he doesn't have a lot of prime names on his resume.
Agreed.
I don't agree with that. When you talk about Gennady Golovkin, Danny Jacobs, Jamel Charlo, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, those guys are in their prime. You can say whatever you want to, but at the end of the day, those guys are in their prime. It is what it is. Now, if you want to talk about Kovalev and Cotto and some of the other guys like Chavez Jr. or something like that, all that's well and fine. I get it. But Canelo does have a lot of prime names on his resume. So no, sir, I'm sorry. I can't agree with that.
I see
And that's not even including Danny Jacobs and Lara and some of the other guys.
Daniel Jacobs. I see Erislandy Lara. I see Austin Trout. To me, those are his best victories. The second fight against Triple G. Those are his best victories. I'll give him credit for beating the kid Caleb Plant, even though I don't think that Caleb Plant went into the fight thinking that he actually could win. And I also don't
He probably didn't, but at the end of the day, Caleb Plant, when it came down to it, Caleb Plant was an undefeated champion, and he is better than either Charlo brother. It is what it is, and about the same level on Demetrius Andrade, so it is what it is.
don't think that Caleb Plant throws enough punches, but I'll give him credit for that one as well. And I think that, in the aftermath of Canelo's career, when we go back and evaluate his career, we might come to find that Caleb Plant was his last great performance because he's not looked great since that fight.
I 100% agree with that. Canelo Alvarez has not quite looked the same ever since that fight. That was his last great performance, and then ever since that, he really hasn't had a super duper great performance. I mean, he looked great against Jermell Charlo, but not really quite the same fighter that I was usually accustomed to.
Canelo is a great talent. I think he's had a great career. And of course, he's a Hall of Famer. No doubt about that. But I don't know if, I think there's a little bit more window dressing with his record than what people realize in his career. And I think his team has done a phenomenal job. You got to give Oscar De La Hoya a lot of credit. He doesn't get enough credit for co-signing.
Well, if you want to state overall that Canelo didn't fight not Gennady Golovkin, but Sergey Kovalev, maybe at his absolute peak, and also that Amigo Cotto and some other guys, you can state that, but at the end of the day, Danny Jacobs, Gennady Golovkin, Araceli Lara, Plant, Callum Smith, what's his name, Billy Joe Saunders, Jermell Charlo, some of the other guys that I'm forgetting to mention, Austin Trout, all those guys were in their prime. It is what it is.
Canelo early in his career, and then also helping with the matchmaking. They know when to cause Canelo to fight certain guys and when to stay away. Like Benavidez is not going to happen right now.
I agree. And that, to me, is the point that Andre Ward wanted to get to, because we all can pretty much see that Benavidez is going to be hell for Canelo. He's extremely fast, hits very hard, and is very tall. It's going to be very difficult for Canelo to get to his head. Now, we know that Canelo is a phenomenal...
If Canelo Alvarez plans to beat David Benavidez, he can't headhunt in that fight. He's overall going to have to go to his body, and Canelo does go to the body pretty phenomenally well.
Arm and body puncher, so we'll see how tough Benavidez is when that fight happens. Now, do I agree necessarily that Canelo is a product of great matchmaking? Well, I guess you can make that point, but we also have to, focus on the fact that Canelo has gone above and beyond to challenge himself. So,
thank you for stating that, sir. Once again, I get these guys in my comment section that say, "Oh, you're just a Canelita lover," and also, no, dude. If you take a look at Canelo Alvarez's career, you can tell that he's an all-time great fighter. Not just a great fighter, all-time great fighter. Now, if you want to state once again that there's certain times where he fought guys to where they weren't necessarily coming off of a great performance, or, certain guys like Kovalev or Cotto that weren't at the absolute peak of their career, you can state that, but those guys were still A-grade level fighters. And if we're going to once again give that, same energy to Canelo, okay, no problem. But then let's also keep the same energy with that of Floyd Mayweather Jr. Because when he fought Oscar De La Hoya, Oscar was not at the absolute peak of his powers. When he fought Zab Judah overall had already lost multiple times, when it came down to it. Cotto had already been knocked out and brutally stopped twice in his career when it came down to it, even though you could argue that Cotto maybe became a better fighter in terms of a technical fighter as a result of it. But, that's up to the eye of the beholder, I suppose. But once again, if we're going to use these standards for Canelo, no problem. Let's start using these fighters for everybody else.
Well, he does deserve that level of credit. When apparently many fighters did not want to fight Triple G, he stepped into the ring to fight Triple G. There were other fighters that he fought that, he didn't necessarily have to fight. And I do think that he was trying to fight Charlo, but Charlo is scared of him. I mean, let's just be honest about that.
Oh, man, sir, thank you for stating that. Once again, Jermell Charlo, when it came down to it, Jermell Charlo turned down that contract against Canelo Alvarez very long ago. But this gets swept over onto the deep space overall with the LDBC New Media and the Pro Blackity Black channels. It is what it is. Thank you for stating that, sir.
About that.
It's too dangerous.
Hey, I think that's a little unfair. I'll tell you why. To fight a guy like...
And the thing is about Jermell Charlo is that even if the Canelo fight don't happen, whatever. But it's like the dude don't fight anybody. Like the man overall called out Benavidez. Well, I knew damn well that fight's not going to happen. Because it's really not that hard overall to tell him the fight's not going to happen. You just got to take a look at someone's pattern. Jermell Charlo don't fight anybody. Like the man hasn't fought Benavidez. He hasn't fought Andrade. He hasn't fought Canelo. He hasn't fought overall some of the other guys. You know, Danny Jacobs, he hasn't fought fucking anybody. And I like Jamal Charlo. You know, I've always liked the Charlo brothers, but at the end of the day, it's like, dude, it's like, when are you going to take a big fight?
Guy like Austin Trout or Erislandy Lara, when Canelo did, if you're the money man, you ain't got to take those fights, especially not against a Cuban southpaw who can box, right?
Well, the
Lara was a genius fighter, by the way. It's very unfortunate to see that his career kind of ended in a little bit more of an anticlimactic fashion. But Erislandy Lara was a genius fighter. Genius defensive fighter, anyway.
fight kind of was made because Lara embarrassed him into taking that fight.
I would somewhat agree with that. Erislandy Lara did go to the post-conference, I believe, of Canelo and N'Gulu, and he kind of called him out. But to be fair, Canelo Alvarez didn't have to take that fight, and he took it anyway.
The Austin Trout fight was made to legitimize Canelo as a potential fight against Floyd Mayweather.
Absolutely. I believe that Floyd stated that if Canelo wants to fight me, he's going to have to fight Austin Trout.
So they pretty much had to make that fight to set up the Mayweather fight so that people could get a sense of Canelo against a quote-unquote slick black fighter. That was marketing for the Mayweather fight. So I give Canelo all the credit in the world for defeating all.
And you still have some of these guys overall that state that Austin Trout was robbed against Canelo. Dude, if you go back and watch that fight was at least 8 rounds to 4. Like, that fight really was not as close as what a lot of people want to say. Now, the Lara fight was extremely close. That was a fight overall that could have went either way. But the Austin Trout fight, no.
Austin Trout, and tremendous amount of credit for the Lara fight, but it wasn't like Canelo called out Lara. Lara basically shamed Canelo into fighting him. Kudos to Canelo for taking the fight, but Golden Boy did not want Canelo to fight Lara.
That's very true, actually. Oscar De La Hoya was scared to death of Erislandy Lara for Canelo because he realized that Erislandy Lara was an extremely tough opponent. I remember that.
He took those fights. They were close, but he came out winning. And by the way, I think that's justified. They were very close. I thought he won both fights, to tell you the truth. Lara especially was very close. You don't take those fights if you're a ducking kind of guy. In fact, that's the reason I thought he'd be the star to fight Triple G.
Well, you do if you believe you can beat him.
Well, listen, this is what I'm going to say about Canelo. There are certain fights, in my view, that maybe he did not take in his career. And it's possible that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding David Benavidez. Like I said, I don't know, because some of the negotiations appear a little bit odd to me as well. But it could just be that Canelo is avoiding David Benavidez until maybe he gets defeated. I don't know. But, you know, I've already stated this. Like, I get certain people in my comment section that state that, oh, Canelo's just been doing nothing but cherry picking throughout his whole entire career. Like, that's just completely false. Like I said, you take a look at all the names that Canelo Alvarez has fought. You know, there's just no way to completely allege that, at least not if you know boxing.
So, in other words, if he doesn't believe...
That was pretty much a checkmate. And kudos to Max Kellerman, who always acknowledges when whoever it is he's conversing with or debating against makes a point that he cannot refute. He will just acknowledge it and move forward. But to Andre Ward's point, Canelo Alvarez knows at this stage in his career that there are certain fighters that he does not want to get into the ring with, especially in the 168-pound weight class, because if he loses, he will have no excuses. That's the reason why when Bubu Andre stormed his post-fight press conference, he said, "Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here," because he knows Bubu Andre will give him hell.
Well, Demetrius Bubu Andrade, you know, and I agree with that. Canelo Alvarez realized that Demetrius Bubu Andrade is just a guy that, once again, he's another one of those fighters that is too big of a threat for the little reward that he's going to bring. And, you know, it just is what it is. You know, but like I've already stated, this is just my personal view. And even in my view, Judah has kind of overrated Demetrius Bubu Andrade a little bit. You know, like, you know, there are so many people that stated that Andrade is going to show, you know, David Benavidez up. You know, he's going to have a great performance against him. He's 10 times better than what Caleb Plant is. And then he couldn't even go past 6 rounds. It's like, I've always seen Demetrius Bubu Andrade for what he is, which is a great talent, but always the most overrated talent of the past 10 plus years. I've never seen Demetrius Bubu Andrade in a fight and said, oh my God, he looks like the best boxer throughout these weight divisions. I've never seen that. And I ended up proving to be correct in that fight against David Benavidez. Now, to be fair, Benavidez is pretty much a light heavyweight, but Andrade could easily fit in at the 168-pound weight class. Easily. Because he's a dude that, rehydrated at 195 pounds in that fight? You know, and he's a 6'2" dude with like a 73-inch arm reach. So he doesn't really get that much of an excuse from me.
There are certain fighters that other fighters know just by watching them fight, okay, this guy's going to be a major problem. And Benavidez is one, Boo Andrade is another. Now, Jamal Charlo, he's pretty much straight up and down, no special effects. He can fight.
Thank you, sir, for stating that. I've been saying that about Jamal Charlo for so many fucking years. So many years. Jamal Charlo is not a guy that was ever going to beat Canelo.
But he's a bit chinny, and I don't think that he believes that he can beat Canelo. Boo Andrade and Benavidez, they both believe that they can defeat Canelo. And I think that Canelo thinks in his heart that they have a chance to defeat him as well.
Right now.
We are just getting started.
No, we just getting ended. Basically, that's pretty much it on that, brothers. I just thought that this segment was very interesting. And once again, as usual, Andre Ward brought some very potent points to the table that deserve discussion. So peace.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. I just thought that was interesting as well. But anyways, I agree with some of the points that Judah brought up. I also disagree with some of the points. Now, do I agree that Canelo views David Benavidez as a major problem? Yes, I do. Does that mean that I think he's going to avoid him? No, not necessarily. But Canelo, in my view, is going to have to get in the ring with David Benavidez eventually. But Judah also said certain points that I've been saying about Canelo for years, which is that he's just fought way too many great opponents to ever just be called a complete duck or cherry picker throughout his whole entire career. Now, if he clearly is not going to fight David Benavidez, then he's going to deserve all that criticism, but it is what it is. Like I said, there are certain things that David Benavidez in his corner kind of said that made me kind of raise an eyebrow as well. So I would have to see overall what's completely going on, but we'll see. But it appears that Canelo is going to fight that of Jaime Munguia next, and then overall that of Jamal Charlo next, which I think are two pretty good fights. But he is going to have to get in the ring with David Benavidez. That'd be a very interesting fight. But Canelo is starting to slow down as a fighter, in my view. And that's not giving an excuse. But earlier on, I predicted that Canelo would beat David Benavidez. But Benavidez is a guy that has always been a bit dangerous. And on top of that, he's probably going to be about legitimately 2 weight classes bigger than Canelo Alvarez, really, when it comes down to it. And he's a guy that's getting better with every single fight. So Canelo Alvarez, he might want to make that fight sooner than later if he plans overall to stretch out that fight. We'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.